Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized, where truth survives and we got your back. I'm Heidi Cuda. I'm here with my friends Jim Stewartson, High Fidelity, and Sean Connor. In my opinion, the best minds in exposing the militant criminal operation behind disinformation. We are an investigative show about disinformation, and we have an incredible episode coming up. And before we jump into Frontloaded, I want to thank our new patrons. Overnight, we got a couple new supporters of our show, and that is very meaningful to us, as you can imagine. We do this as a labor of love. We think it's important, but getting the support of our viewers is super, super meaningful. All right, so Connor, can we jump into Frontloaded?
Let's go.
Frontloaded.
Right on. So you guys have heard me say this many, many times that angels are everywhere, because I believe they are. And I am close to doctors who are fighting against disinformation. Imagine how much more difficult their work is when they have to deal with patients who've been brainwashed against science. And this is a massive problem in our country. Last week I tested positive for COVID, and because I'm friends with these doctors, I have these angels flocking, checking up on me, making sure that I'm recovering. And one of them is a woman named Dr. Natalia, who's just been an incredible supporter of mine and an incredible exposer of disinformation. She happens to be from Russia. And once she was sure I was okay, I let her know how sad I was and how much I felt for her country and her people, because they had been decade after decade brainwashed themselves. Much of what we're seeing here has been, the Russian people themselves have been targeted. And that caused her a very emotional moment, because she had just seen on Twitter some children being encouraged to basically promote Russian propaganda on the Ukraine war. Do you have that image, Sean? You guys will recognize this Z. See these children making their, pro-war art. And this was very distressing to Dr. Natalia, because she recalled as a child in Russia, she now lives in America, that she had to wear Lenin pins, and it was state-sponsored propaganda starting very, very young with children. And we have talked about this. We see that going on here. We heard Madison Cawthorn, I think yesterday, talk about state propaganda and how he hopes to, encourage, quadruple the number of homeschooling, which he had an American flag behind him. And I kept thinking, that should probably be a Russian flag. Yeah. But what I want to do is show you something about what children are really about, particularly children who are allowed just to be nurtured with love and a sense of community. This is what happens when children aren't raised with propaganda and negativity. This beautiful little clip has a bunch of little kindergarten-aged children. Right now, these children are flocking to a Ukrainian refugee child and just smothering him with love and support. And that's what children are really about. And I want to thank Peter Jukes for that, because it did cheer me up in a moment where I was concerned about the propaganda impacts on our youth. I realized that children, who are raised with love and support and community, and a sense of just...
And they aren't indoctrinated.
Right. Yes,
they're not taught that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the most upsetting things about all of this has been, watching the effect that it has on kids. Right. Mike Flynn sells like digital soldiers onesies and stuff. Right.
Yeah.
From these kids who have parents that are in the cult, are being indoctrinated right now. And it's there was a video recently of a teacher who had indoctrinated her kids into MAGA ideology, and talked about said, Biden, kick him out, like
Yeah.
these 5-year-olds
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the president of the United States
Yeah.
in school, in a church.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, the right wing screams about the left wing woke indoctrination, which is just projection.
Yes.
That's what they want to do, is actually indoctrinate our kids.
That's right. And I remember when I wrote my first book with Ice-T, he always used to use this little metaphor when children are just allowed to play in a sandbox without being taught hate. They don't see color. They're just there with their friends. And
Yep.
that's the kind of world that we want to see, and the kind of world that we want to see return. And what's incredible is stay for our guest. We have Professor Martin Shaw from London, who has just written a book about political racism and how it was used to sell Brexit. And we could not help but draw the parallels to what we saw happening here in America, and the way that I just, reading the book on like the caravan, CRT, the Muslim ban, everything. So the parallels between what happened in UK and what happened here were very, very stark. And so we have an incredible conversation coming up with him, um, where we're going to also give you some marching orders on what to do about it. And that is exciting as well. All right. So shall we get into Hi-Fi's word phrase of the week?
Let's do it.
All right. So our word phrase of the week this week is totalism. And you may ask yourself, what is totalism? Well, we're going to discuss the definition by psychologist Robert Lifton. Totalism is the control of an individual by another individual or a group. In political speak, this can refer to authoritarianism, totalitarianism, autocracies, autarchs. But the reason this is important is because, as Jim wrote earlier in his Substack, Putin is now a totalist. Putin thinks that he should control every thought that goes on in every Russian's head and every Ukrainian's head and probably every Chechnyan, Georgian, etc.'s head. He is a totalist.
Yeah. Totalism is a mindset as much as anything else. It means that you have Putin himself, right? According to Lifton, who knows everything about brainwashing and about these ideologies, says, Putin is not insane. And I agree. In the same way that Mike Flynn is not insane at all.
Yeah.
He is a totalist. And the problem with totalism, other than, it's just obviously inherently evil, is it gives people like Vladimir Putin a pretext for genocide.
Yeah.
And our guest, Martin Shaw, has written a lot about genocide. And hopefully we'll talk to him some about that. But what Putin is doing in Ukraine, in my opinion, is genocide. If you look at the images of Mariupol, that city is wiped out. There is nothing left. And there's no other way to look at that other than Putin committing genocide on Ukrainians because of his totalist ideology. The totalist ideology being that the Russian Empire is destined to come back with Moscow as the third Rome. That's his ideology. That's what he believes totally, which is why he is so dangerous. And the fact that he has thousands of nuclear weapons is a problem.
He's
talk a little
fucked
bit
up
about
enough
that
to
in the
use
Hellscape.
nukes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I asked Ruth Ben-Ghiat in her weekly fascism lecture, when a dictator is firing all his generals and locking up his main spy leaders and firing all his staff, what does she call that? And she says she calls it authoritarian nihilism. And I thought that does not sound
Very dark.
good, but it sounded very legit. All right. Well, thank you for that, gentlemen. And let's get on to why it matters.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why high fidelity?
You know, Sean, you're a genius.
I did some kinetic typography this time.
So great.
Assholes against abortion made
Yeah.
me laugh.
Assholes against abortion. Yeah, let's talk about why that matters and what this means. All right, so one of my favorite news sources, exposed by cmd.org, put up an article this week about how ALEC, the American Legislative Council, which is funded by the CNP, has been pushing to overturn Roe versus Wade. And they are a dark money organization. They have a bunch of Christian nationalists in ALEC, in COP. They are attached to the Federalist Society, which has loaded our Supreme Court with far-right conservatives. And frankly, it's about time that we call this for what it is. We have a religious threat in our country that are attempting to do damage to the citizens of our country. Because by overturning Roe versus Wade, you're not going to stop abortions. What you're going to stop are legal abortions. Abortions are still going to happen. They're just going to be done in back alleys by people who are not qualified in conditions that are not safe, and women are going to die. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
We can tie in brief legal briefs here real fast if you want, guys.
Yeah.
Just because that's what I was going to talk about is Missouri, right? And
Yes.
the sort of
Let's do it.
quarantining of the state borders and having them, it would now be illegal for them to get any services outside of that state. So keeping them within the state. That goes along with 7 other states that are trying to enact the same laws as Texas put in: Arkansas, Florida, South Carolina, South Dakota, Kentucky, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Ohio.
Just secede
And Ohio.
already. Just
So once
secede.
No, don't fucking secede. Sit their asses down and realize that science has moved forward.
Yeah.
Your little fucking book doesn't matter
Yep.
to everybody. Sorry, that's not how it works. And frankly, we are sliding into totalism in the United States. You can't go outside of your state borders to get an abortion. Who the fuck are you?
Unbelievable. Yeah, exactly.
We don't live in
Well,
gulags,
and that's just
bro.
one of the examples of the controls that they're putting on. Obviously, we know what's happening with controls against trans kids and just on and on, endless.
The thing to note, I think, here is that it's not by typical geopolitical borders, north, south, etc. I mean, with Ohio in there,
That's
you've got
right.
majority
Yeah.
of the South, but Ohio jumps in, and that just means now you're looking at ideological separation, which possibly could be the coasts versus the sort of
Right.
Midwest. But I thought that was interesting, and that's
Well,
part
the
of
states are becoming the authoritarian labs.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that is what we know.
I just have to make this note about the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Look, Ginny Thomas,
CNP.
Ginny fucking Thomas was texting with Mark Meadows all day long on 1-6, encouraging all sorts of horrible shit.
Yeah.
That person is Clarence Thomas's handler and has been for 40 fucking years. That dude doesn't talk in the Supreme Court because he doesn't have any ideas of his own. He's just part of a team that has infiltrated the Supreme Court and is just 1/9 of the court is just run by the fucking Council for National Policy.
Right.
Not only that, now we've got 5 other ones who were put in there by help me out here. Federalist Society.
Leonard Leo.
Opus
Leonard
Dei.
Leo, who is a Knight of Malta and part of Opus Dei. And the majority of the Supreme Court, a supermajority now, are extremists, Christian extremists, who will 1,000% destroy the right to an abortion in America.
Well, that was
They
the whole
already
point of
have.
installing them. So
I would
yes.
also like to bring up the fact Robert Hansen, who was the worst spy in FBI history, was a member of Opus Dei. His management actually put him into a position where he would have access to the names and details of agents who were working against the Russians. All that information was handed over. Opus Dei apparently has infiltrated the FBI. If you look at William Barr, if you look at Louis Freeh, we have a theocratic fascist problem, not just in our governments, but in our government institutions, the institutions that are supposed to keep us safe. It's time to fucking call it what it is and deal with it.
Yeah.
Let's move on to that.
I would very
Sorry.
much like it to start with the impeachment of Clarence Thomas. If that is a thing, can it be done, please? We need these things to be done. Okay, yes, moving on. Thank you, gentlemen.
Moving on. Let's see. What was the next one we were going to talk about?
Putin's Global FC.
Putin's Global FC. Yes, and I don't mean football club, and I don't mean fan club. No, I mean Putin's Global Fifth Column. What do I mean by this? There were a couple different articles that came out. One of them was from New Lines magazine, in which they exposed emails showing how the far right in Europe, specifically France, Germany, and Italy, have been heavily in contact and quite possibly financed by Russia.
Yeah.
Go figure. We're talking Matteo Salvini. In Italy, we're talking Marie Le Pen and the League in France. And we're talking about Germany's Alternative for Deutschland. All right.
Yeah.
This is documented now that the far right in these countries was working with Russia and most likely received funding from them. The second part of this story is a story that was published in the New Republic by one of our former guests, Mr. Craig Unger. Love him. Good job out there, Craig.
Yes, we do.
And what he talks about is the Republicans' history with Russia, not just with regards to Manafort, but also an individual named Buckman. And Ed Buckman is now Marjorie Taylor Greene's chief of staff. Well, Ed Buckman was responsible for introducing Tom DeLay to Russians. Tom DeLay, who went to prison for corruption. Go figure. This is a long, sordid history that the GOP has had of courting Russian money, courting Russian assets, and becoming Russian assets themselves.
Yes.
The Cold War didn't end. It just went underground.
And what we're going to learn from Martin Shaw is it is time to take this knowledge and this intel and use it against them. Now that we have an opportunity with this war that is happening and the awareness of this fifth column, it's time to use all of this against them. And we are going to talk more about that. Thank you for that high-fi. If there's nothing else, let's move on to Bitcoin scams and billionaire plans.
Bitcoin scams and billionaire plans. This is a good one. I like this one a lot. All right. So this is three stories, actually. And those three stories are Hewlett Packard, one of their finance managers, was able to abuse not just her corporate card, but accounts on PayPal, Square, and Stripe. Of course, PayPal, started by Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, sold to the head of eBay, Pierre, I forget his name,
Omidyar.
Yeah, Pierre. Yeah, so tech oligarchs, right? She was able to take $5 million. Square, of course, is Jack Dorsey, and Stripe is two young boys over in Ireland who were funded by Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and a group called Sequoia Capital. Now, one of the things that when PayPal first started up was our machine learning and our algorithms are going to prevent fraud. Not doing so great, guys. And that's why the second story is also important. Now, say what you will about DA Manhattan Bragg. However, he was able to bust some Bitcoin scammers. And why they were Bitcoin scammers is they were allowing drug traffickers and SIM swappers. Now, if you don't know what a SIM swapper is, that's someone who steals your number, puts it on a different SIM card, and gains access to all your accounts. But these drug dealers and SIM card swappers were using PayPal and eBay accounts to commit fraud, to drain people's bank accounts, and to launder the proceeds of their drug money. What have we been talking about since episode 1? Bitcoin scams, drug dealing, money laundering.
Yes,
You'd think
extortion.
people catch on by now. Yeah.
Yes.
And then the third story.
And just as a note, that was $7 million worth of fraud, and the HP employee made off with somewhere like $5 million. And I remember reading what her lawyer said. He said, "Oh, she's sorry."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about, wow, that's some serious
You better pay it all
entitlement.
back, lady. Anyway, and
All
yeah,
right.
and what she spent it on was not even like, she's not buying food for
Fancy
the poor. No,
purses.
she's buying Hermes bags and
Hermes.
scarves and a Tesla.
Yeah,
Thanks, Elon.
very
Anyway,
bougie.
the final part of this story is a new story that's just come out. A whistleblower at Microsoft alleges that Microsoft is guilty of at least $400,000 in violations of the Foreign Bribery Act. And what that means is, in the United States, we have rule of law. We don't do bribes, right? Well, apparently Microsoft has been doing this overseas. And the reason I want to bring this story into this is because these tech oligarchs with their software companies are enabling bad behavior globally. And I don't know if that's by design. I don't know if that's accidental, but whatever it is, it needs to be put in fucking check.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you for that. And
They-
did you?
Sorry, they
No, go ahead, Jim.
the just the Bitcoin situation, the fact that Russians have funded so much of Silicon Valley. We do have to start looking at some of these companies, including Twitter. Sorry, but
Definitely Twitter.
Yes.
what we have to look at these motivations and start smoking this stuff out.
Yeah.
If you guys are influenced by investment from Russians, if you are promoting technologies like cryptocurrency, which is being used by Russians and being used by drug cartels all over the world, you need to start answering for those things. And as Hi-Fi said, it is really time for people to choose sides.
Yes.
It really is.
Are
I
you
so
fucking
agree.
Ooh.
American
By the way,
or not?
did you guys see today that Elon Musk is talking about starting his own social media network for freedom of speech?
Oh,
Elon Musk is such a bitch ass. Elon Musk tried to get people who were talking about short selling Tesla kicked off of Twitter. Elon Musk can.
Oh, he didn't try. He didn't try. He got quite a few people kicked off for that very thing. From fake DMCI, is that right? Account? DMCA, yeah. Just horrible, ridiculous stuff. Yeah.
this would not be
He's got
radicalized Truth
$1
Survive without a
show.
Hi-Fi having his Elon Musk moment.
Yeah. We're gonna hit
Elon Musk.
let's do it.
Fuck Elon Musk.
One thing I wanted to say, I sent you guys a note in our chat. I don't know if you saw it from a former Google employee, a woman who was originally from Ethiopia who left the company and is now doing her own amazing work. But she tweeted out last night, I don't think the media talks enough about the fascist tech bros and white supremacy. And immediately I tracked her down and invited her on the show because we talk about it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about political racism and social media impacts coming up here with Professor Martin Shaw, so stick around. Okay, Hi-Fi, thank you so much for that. Now, are we going to do any more brief legal briefs, or are we moving right on to Hellscape?
I'm gonna jump in Hellscape because we covered the brief legal briefs with the 7 states.
But we didn't get to see the intro, and it's so cool.
Too bad.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
There you go.
Okay, take it away, Jim.
All right. So I want to start out with some mixed news, and then I'm going to go to some good news, and then, some not so good news. So that's the journey I'm about to take you on, just
Thank
so you
you.
know.
It's a roller coaster. Buckle up.
So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that the fascist cult on the right that has been developed by Mike Flynn and Vladimir Putin that represents a fifth column, as we've discussed on the show before, inside the United States, is desperate
Yes.
and dangerous
Yes.
right now. They are cornered, like Vladimir Putin is cornered because of his overreaching and the fact that he believed his own propaganda. The fact that he's cornered and has nuclear weapons makes him the most dangerous man in the world.
Yeah.
The most dangerous man in America is Michael T. Flynn, the worst traitor in the history of America, who has been working with Vladimir Putin to create a fifth column in the United States since 2015. Now, Mike Flynn started Q through his PAC, Political Action Committee, MAGA 3X. Q was Mike Flynn's alter ego all the way through. There are a bunch of disinformation agents trying to convince you otherwise, trying to convince you that it's a mentally ill guy in South Africa, that it's Ron Watkins, who's the idiot son of the guy who owned the website. None of that is true. What is true is that Mike Flynn was running a psychological operation in the United States, which created a cult. Now, the reason why I'm saying this story again is because Mike Flynn has just now taken Q on board. There's no in between anymore. He just is fucking Q right now, and people need to fucking pay attention to it, not only because of what's happening right now, but because of what it means for what's been done in the past. It's important. So I cut together a video, and it's 2 minutes long, and I want to play the whole thing because I think it's important for people to hear for themselves what this motherfucker is brainwashing people to believe directly, not through some LARP, through his fucking words coming out of his mouth. Now, the people that he's communicating with in this clip are Clay Clark, who runs Reawaken America, which is the brainwashing tour that Mike Flynn sends around the United States with a bunch of, psychotic cult leaders to brainwash, boomers and Christians into the cult. So that's Clay Clark, who's the younger guy. The guy X22, whose show Mike Flynn is on, is a guy named Dave Hayes. Dave Hayes is also known as Praying Medic, who's a huge fucking QAnon account, a Christian QAnon account. Here's the secret about Dave Hayes. He wrote a whole bunch of Q drops, like a lot of them. If you look at Dave Hayes' writing, you can see immediately what I'm talking about. He was one of the authors of Q Drops, and we'll get into that more. Mike Flynn is on his show. So let's play the clip, and I put a little overlay so nobody gets confused about what this clip is.
Problem with free will is free will.
Can you guys hear that?
And
Yes.
And what we have all learned is not to trust the science.
If we comply, America will die. But if we do not comply
And if we fight back, we will win. And I'm seeing the corruption being exposed. I'm seeing the Biden laptop now being proven as true. I am seeing the corruption of the Ukrainian leadership being exposed.
Yeah, I just caught what Clay was saying, because he's right. People can do. There's a lot of things that people can do. They can get involved in all sorts of activities and things that, within their own damn communities. I mean, Adolf Hitler. I'm going to use this because the Nazis existed in the 30s, so that wasn't even 100 years ago. And look at what they did to Europe, and look at what they tried to do, frankly, to the world. Don't think that the rise of tyrannical psychopaths is something that is a thing of the past.
No kidding.
Go speak at your school board, even if you don't have children at the school board. If you don't believe in the filth that they're teaching our children these days, then go speak up at a school board, or better yet, go run for school board. You've got to do more research. There's a lot of people that attack me for being all kinds of things and call me all kinds of names. Yes. And what I do know as a fact, that nation states rise and fall. And the American republic that we have, this form of government that we have, which is a republic, it will only last as long as the people of this country allow it to last. And my phrase that I love to use is local action has a national impact. So get involved in your communities like you've never been involved before. I know a lot of people in my generation that have awoken, and they are rising. What is happening in the country, and the right types of people are also awakening. We have to expose it. We have to expose this arrogance. Otherwise, we're going to lose this country.
Jesus Christ. The right kind of people. Not even cloaking it.
Fuck you, Mike Flynn.
They also
Fuck
use
you, Mark.
awoken, right? They also use awoken. They hate
the whole
awoken.
thing. I don't know if you caught the beginning of it, but he said that we should not believe in science.
Yeah.
I like science. Science is great.
Yeah,
Well,
he said there, obviously, we should not trust science.
No, you should just believe me, right? No science.
one of the things that I've noticed that the operatives do, and I know you guys are aware of this, but our audience should know about this, is there's a number of blue blobs with the white checks who are just like, oh, he's just zany or kooky. They try
or
to
grifter.
Yep.
That's
grifter.
the one. He's just a grifter.
So no. Listen to what Jim's saying. This is incredibly dangerous rhetoric, and that it's delivered in such a way where I'm running it through my head and thinking of friends of mine in their 60s who will eat that shit up.
Yep.
They'll think he's fucking great. And that's where we are.
It is, and yes, that whole thing. Really, it was like every time I cut, it could have been a Q drop.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, there's no difference at all, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's been him all along. He's been doing this all along, and I need people to understand that. All right, now let's move to a little bit of better news, at least in my opinion. I mean, let's just show that. I just want to show that the graphic on the Biden one.
Putin is a butcher.
Yeah.
Oh, the TV graphic.
Yeah.
Yep. Here we
Just
go.
real quick.
Sure.
Thanks, Jim.
This guy.
That's the one.
Yep.
This is a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
The president of the United States said Putin cannot remain in power. That's no joke.
Big time,
right?
yeah.
That is the president of the United States basically declaring war on Vladimir Putin.
Saying
right?
there's got to be regime change, yeah.
Look, regime change is problematic. You don't go around the world fucking, changing regimes willy-nilly.
Yep.
This is different. This is the most dangerous man in the world. Thousands of nukes with a totalist ideology who's committing genocide already.
Yeah.
And he's got a shitload of operatives in the United States. So this is a very unusual situation, and the president, in my opinion, is stepping up and saying, "Okay, buddy, you want to play? Well, we're playing now because I'm coming for you." And that's really important. I think it is a good message, and I know that it's caused some political angst, and I'm so glad.
It's good.
Pearl
Good,
clutching. Pearl clutching.
good. Clutch your fucking pearls. Vladimir Putin has to go. Straight up.
How many fucking women and children have to die before people get it through their fucking heads that this dude is no good and he needs to be gone? I understand the Russian people have been brainwashed and fucked with for decades under his regime, but it's time. We've got to get the message to them. They've got to kick this motherfucker out.
Yep.
Sorry.
Could not agree more.
Yes, and I think what we're going to learn from Professor Shaw coming up also is that the West has to do a soul search on what our failings may have been as well, because we need to actually, if we're not learning from our past, we cannot move forward without, the threat of this,
100%.
being continuing. Thank you for that. And now let's get to the last bit of Hellscape. This is a very emotional thing for me, but I think it's very important because, Jim, you bring a sensitivity to this that a lot of people don't have, and I think we need that. So I'm steeling myself for it.
Yeah. So this is from a documentary that I have been part of. I've released now 12 or 13 minutes of it on my Substack, all in one piece, so you can watch it. What this is about is the damage that's ongoing around the world, the psychological trauma that is endured by the people who've been affected by people like Mike Flynn, by people who watch videos like that without any warning, without any context, and believe it. It produces people like the person that you're going to see in this video. And the person in this video, this is right when Joe Biden is inaugurated. And this woman just cannot understand it. So let's watch this and we'll talk about it a little bit.
President Trump, if you see this, please save us.
There's a woman in this video who really just cannot come to grips with the fact that Joe Biden is president.
This is America. This is our land.
Can't conceive of it. It doesn't make sense.
Please, President Trump.
And her story is replicated millions of times. There are people just fucking confused.
Still are.
So when that video came out, there were a lot of people on the left laughing.
Yep.
A lot. And I will note that, there's a lot of overlap with the people who are laughing and the people who are attacking us.
Yeah.
Because they want you to believe that woman is a joke.
Yeah.
That she's not, human. That she's just some idiot MAGA. I don't know anything about that woman. I don't care who that woman was. I don't care if she was a racist. I don't care what she believed. She got psyoped. Her fucking mind is split down the middle because a bunch of fucking psychos created content that intentionally traumatized and dissociated her and broke her mind in two, submerged her original and normal, at least to her, moral framework, and created this different person that believed that Donald Trump was the eternal president of the United States.
Yep.
Believed it so much that when it didn't come true, the cognitive dissonance that was created put her in that state, put her in pain. What that is pain.
Yeah.
It's mental and emotional pain, and it's not fucking funny.
No, it's not. No.
So I'm just here to say that's still happening all day long, every day, on Telegram and on other propaganda channels all over the world. We need to put an end to it because I don't want to see more of that. And I'm sorry that people even have to watch it.
Yeah.
But we have to look at it in the face and start taking it seriously.
Great.
Thank you, Jim. The reason I stayed up all night doing the longest thread I've ever done, which is the raw notes from our original interview in August, is that message in particular, to not buy into the fact that we are supposed to be divided and hating each other, but to actually look at it for what it is, which is 5 particular men with Putin's military behind it running a psyop to split America so they can be so we can be invaded mentally and ultimately, I'm sure, physically. So thank you for that. Profound. All right. Wow. Well,
Right.
Okay. We're going to
So
start
now-
getting to the root of some of this stuff with our upcoming guest, Professor Shaw, author
Can't
of
wait.
Political Racism
He's
and
amazing.
multiple books on Cold War era war and genocide. Who better for this moment in time than somebody, a sociologist with that kind of expertise? Welcome, Martin Shaw, Professor Martin Shaw. We actually have a lot of luck with Martins. Our money laundering correspondent is also named Martin. We are so happy that you're joining us all the way from the UK. I was up all night reading your book on political racism, as I'm sure was the rest of the team. We have an important conversation ahead of us. And would you like to tell our viewers who are global just a brief history of your academic background?
Well, I'm a sociologist. I started out being interested in politics, sociology of political life, political sociology. I then got increasingly interested in war and conflict and sociology of violence and military relations, and then I moved into the area of genocide, and which is so closely related to war, as we can see in what's going on at the present time. And I increasingly got myself involved in debates and analyses around the question of genocide, but then more recently, I've been writing about genocide for 20 years or something. I started to work on what's going on in British politics, because we've had a very profound change with with Brexit and the political changes that's brought. And for a long time, I suppose I've always followed and been involved in politics in my own country, but I hadn't worked academically on it until fairly recently.
And what's amazing is you share a personal story in your new book, Political Racism, and I think so many of us were just called to duty. We had to take our skill sets and apply them, and I find that in your book, that seems to be what happened. And well, first of all, I just want to compliment your beautiful tan. Jim and I are in California, and we are pale compared to you, so apparently you've been getting some sunshine.
It does happen here, It's,
Excellent.
not always, but we've been.
We are going to start with a little bit of lightness, because we're going to be going towards some of the darkness, and that is only right in these times in which we live. I was up all night reading your book, and I had to, every few pages, just press pause, because in my own mind, I was reading your words and substituting America and substituting Trump when you were talking about Brexit. and so many of these same actors intersected. And I think it's very important that people understand how much othering and how much fear of was used as a tool both in America and in your country in order to sell what really isn't ideology, but really to sell, I guess, a way to power. And if you could just speak on that for a bit, I'd be very grateful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are big differences as well as similarities between the UK and the USA. I mean, we have just different histories of racism. I mean, you have the history of slavery, within the continental USA, and for the UK, slavery was always something that happened mainly overseas, in the empire, and you had the Civil War. We haven't had anything like that in our country in the last 200 years. Although we've had a lot of political conflict, and so I think that there are differences, but where the similarities are, I think, is that the political right has always, in the last post Second World War period, focused a lot on issues to do with race and identity. I mean, that has been a fairly consistent theme of their politics. That's been how they have been able to get popular support, and we have a history where in the early part of the post-war period, the mainstream right had a lot of points of agreement with the mainstream left, the Labour Party in our country, the equivalent of your Democrats, and there was a sort of consensus about quite a lot of issues, including about how to deal with race. So in the 60s, they came to the conclusion that they wanted to stop further immigration, or to control and to limit further immigration. But at the same time, they would introduce laws to stop overt racism, to stop overt racial discrimination. And that's basically been the mainstream. But the right wing of our main right wing party, the Conservative Party, and fringe parties beyond that have always gone much further. And for them, it's always been a question of trying to accentuate the racist politics. And this is a long history in our country. I know this part, the whole chapter in my book, going back really to the 1950s. How this has developed, and it's the main tradition of both the mainstream and the far right in the UK. But this is in the period that I'm talking about, in the period basically since the beginning of this century, it became increasingly combined with this movement towards taking the UK out of the European Union, which is a really big deal, because since the 1970s, the UK has been a part of this multinational union that has been developing in Europe. It's been deeply embedded in our institutions, and the right, mainstream right, until this century, was basically reconciled to that. But starting in the 1990s and increasingly in the 2000s, and especially in the last 10 years, they mobilized very effectively to oppose the European Union, and they did that by heightening racist politics, basically by opposing immigration and campaigning against minorities.
Yes, and there's a quote in your book from Nigel Farage, who says it's not about racism, it's about numbers, or something to that effect. How is that not racist?
Well, the way they try to explain that it isn't racist is that they say, that England or Britain is a small island, it's a small country, we can only have so many people. It just so happens that the people we want to keep out a lot of the time are poorer people of color.
Yeah.
So it's not racist, but
Yes.
Yeah, we had obviously we had a very parallel thing here, and it's not a coincidence that Cambridge Analytica, Steve Bannon, all of those people were in common in Brexit and the 2016 election here. 2016, that entire year was a manipulated political movement that absolutely accentuated racism, obviously there with Brexit, but needless to say here, starting with Donald Trump coming down the stairs and, saying, all Mexicans are rapists.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your thoughts were if you looked into kind of the technical and social media manipulation that went along with Brexit.
I have quite a lot. I mean, that is quite an important part of the book. Really, is the way in which the campaign to leave the EU in the referendum that was held in 2016 systematically mobilized anti-immigrant sentiment and introduced mass usage of Facebook on a scale to achieve that in a way that had not been seen in the UK before. Then UK was a little bit behind the US in terms of the role of social media in elections. So in 2016, essentially, there were two campaigns for Brexit, one led by Farage and the other led by Boris Johnson, which were in a way competing with each other, but also reinforcing each other. And the story that has been told in the British media and but to some extent by British academics is that the Farage campaign was the one which was of course the sort of far right splinter party, UKIP, United Kingdom Independence Party. They were the ones who were mostly majoring on anti-immigrant racism. But what I show, and I mean it's not an entirely new revelation, but it has been, I think, underemphasized in the history, is that the mainstream officially recognized campaign led by Boris Johnson was doing exactly the same thing, but they were doing it partly, and one of the reasons it wasn't recognized is that, of course, the people like me and people who were opposed to Brexit were not targeted with these messages, but people who were receptive or seen potentially as receptive to the Brexit arguments were getting hundreds of messages in a very short period of time, constantly reinforcing.
Yes.
If we stay in the EU, we're going to have millions more immigrants. There are 76 million people in Turkey. They're all going to come to the UK. This sort of thing, and this went on. This was very, very intense in the final stages of the campaign, and it was reinforced by some of the mainstream media. But in the UK, we don't have so much of the right-wing radio stations that you have in the States, but we have perhaps even more than the States. We have this national right-wing press, mainly tabloid papers, which are very powerful. Even though, I mean, fewer people read papers in print form now, but they still read what they produce online, and it gets circulated through social media. And these papers all basically were singing in tune with the Brexit campaign and were reinforcing this anti-immigrant message in a very powerful way.
Yes. And I love that the phrase old hatreds popped up, because I'm sure many of us can relate to that. And there's an incredible line that is in the book about how racism is an incredibly effective tool for dividing people and giving a sense of superiority to those to whom you have nothing material to offer. And that really resonated, so truthfully with what we experienced here. And it, I think, is an incredible defining message for what happened there. Nothing material to offer, just drumming up these old hatreds, which, seem to be these go-tos that work in the clutch every time.
Yeah, I mean, though my story is partly that there are also new hatreds. There are new enemies. There's this striking thing going on in the UK today where a lot of people are really, obviously supporting Ukraine and are very receptive to Ukrainians and in principle to the idea of Ukrainian refugees coming to our country. But in the Brexit campaign, those Ukrainians would have been regarded as East Europeans, and East Europeans were a major target. Even though they're white-skinned, they were being treated in an essentially racialized way, as a sort of inferior group of people coming from poor, weak countries that most British people didn't know that much about, and so they were conjured up as a sort of threat to British society. And of course, the other big sort of new target was Muslims.
Yes.
And that's something which you will be familiar with in the States, but in Britain it's even more perhaps important because we have a much larger. Well, we have the same sort of Muslim population, in a country of 60 million people that you have in a country of 300 million people. So it's much more important part of our population. So anti-Muslim sentiment was a key part of the way in which the Brexit campaign developed over the previous decade, and then mobilized support in the referendum. The message when they said, loads of Turks are going to come to the UK if you don't get out of the EU, they were saying basically loads of poor Muslims, not our sort of people that we want.
It's interesting what you said about the Ukrainians, because on the right wing here, the Ukrainians are being portrayed as Nazis, right?
Right.
Which is Putin's, propaganda.
Yeah.
And so the right wing is dehumanizing Ukrainians as a bunch of Nazis and sort of country folk who don't really deserve our attention. And it's devastating to see as they get, in terms of your work, genocide. And that's what's happening, obviously. Mariupol is a wasteland. It's Grozny, and I think it's important to remember that these hatreds that people develop turn into genocide, as we're seeing in real time.
Yeah. I mean, in the UK, the far right, some of the far right are treating the Ukrainians in that sort of way that you're talking about. Some more marginal, but the mainstream right, Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party they have jumped on the Ukrainian bandwagon basically. They wanted to stop. They don't want any more Ukrainians than really necessary to come to the UK. They haven't. They've been very mean in the way they have approached it. They haven't treated them as refugees. They've treated them as people who have to apply for a visa to come. Yes. And you can only come if you've got a family connection or if you've got a sponsor. And that was the concession they made. So. But in principle, they have jumped on the Ukrainian bandwagon, even if they're being still messing about with this sort of racist politics. I don't know whether we want to talk about the genocide question in Ukraine. I think it is a sort of genocidal war in the sense that there's not so much. I think that Putin, let alone other Russians, actually hate Ukrainians. I think it's right. more that they hate what Ukraine has become, in the sense that it has become more democratic.
Yes,
it's become more pro-European. It's no longer simply subservient to Russia. That's basically what they hate, and so they're carrying out this war in an incredibly brutal way against against civilians, and I think that's where the genocide comes in the sense that modern war, when it's prosecuted against whole civilian populations, becomes this sort of destructive thing, destroying whole societies. In the case of Putin, there's this extra ideological thing that he regards independent Ukraine as a sort of offense to his idea of an imperial Russia, really.
Yes.
That's what he's saying.
That seems so true. I want to talk about your knowledge of war and genocide because you've written books on this subject, and I'd also would love to talk more about your observations on the Second Cold War, because we are like history nerds on this show, and so many clues that we find to the present are things that have occurred in decades past in different forms. But I want to make one additional point from your book on political racism. There's a quote: "It is too easy, more than half a decade on, to treat the referendum as an abstract political decision and to ignore the discrimination, abuse, and violence which it entailed. It is rather like treating the assault on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, as a legitimate protest about the counting of votes, rather than a violent attempt to intimidate elected representatives into overthrowing the result of a presidential election." And I just needed to hear myself say that out loud, because I think that we do not take enough time to pause and look at these moments in history that are so incredibly important and just evaluate them for what they really are.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. I think what you went through at the beginning of 2021 with that insurrection, really, and the way that the Republican Party has panned out since then. I mean, it is quite an extraordinary transformation of what at one point was a relatively mainstream conservative party, comparable to others around the world, into something which is really a far right, in its majority, at least a far right formation, and the resort to violence and the condoning of violence, which you saw obviously through the Trump years. I mean, that's very, very striking. I suppose what I was trying to do there, because I think it's more recognised in the States than it is in the UK, that this is you recognise that's now a part of your politics, and that you face a threat that this is going to come back. And
yes.
Whereas in the UK, I think the moment we had moments like that. I think the referendum was a moment like that, and this is one of the reasons I wrote this book, because I think we've to some extent in our political culture we've lost the memory of exactly how threatening that moment was, and how it could have led to something more like what you experienced. If they had lost, if the anti-Brexit side had managed to get a narrow win, which was possible, obviously, in 2016, I think we would have faced the sort of revolt against that from the Brexiters, that you faced, because one of the things I quote in the book is a poll that was taken just before the referendum, where nearly half the pro-Brexit voters believed that the referendum would be rigged against them, that the elite were going to sort of stop them winning. Well, of course, actually they won, so they didn't need to protest that and try to stop it, overturn it. But I think if it had gone a little, just a little bit swung, just a little bit the other way, it would have been a different decision. We would have been facing something that would have looked a bit more like what you faced. And
the big lie is
yes.
works wherever, right?
Yes.
And it's so dangerous, because if you convince people that the government has already been overthrown, then they feel in their own mind that they have the right to commit violence. And I think you're exactly right. I think they were setting it up for a revolution if it didn't work. I think
Yeah.
Hi-Fi had a question.
Well, I'm not saying that they had planned anything. We don't really have any evidence.
Of course, yeah.
But whereas there's more evidence, I think, in the states that the Trump supporters were planning things. But I think it would have been such a shock to the movement that had developed and the momentum they had developed that we would have seen something. We had already seen a member of parliament murdered, just a week before the election by a far right extremist.
Can you actually tell our viewers a little bit about that? That was my next question before we moved on to the other subjects. We here believe that online harms and the online racism that is stoked through these far right channels have real world impacts and should be treated legally differently than they are currently. And the story of Joe Cox, I think, is a very important one that Americans aren't informed on.
No, and actually, although a lot of people here do remember her, of course, it's a story which is receding into history for us as well. But it's a very shocking story. A relatively young woman, MP, who was attacked in her constituency by a far right extremist, acting alone, but a man who had obviously been consuming the propaganda of far right groups, and who then went at her with a knife and stabbed her many times and killed her. The themes, basically, my point would be, and more than I actually say in the book, would be that he hadn't done that. He had been following this propaganda for years, apparently, but he hadn't done anything like that in the previous decade. The constraints on those people on doing these sorts of things were still quite real. But during this referendum campaign, because people like Boris Johnson and other mainstream right-wing politicians were upping the ante and raising the temperature of this anti-immigrant racism, he felt entitled to and able to go out and do this, and he shouted "Britain first," which happened to be the name of the far right organisation that he was mainly linked to, but also was basically the theme of the pro-Brexit referendum campaign led by Boris Johnson. It was like Trump says, "America first." The same sort of thing.
Of course, "America first" is a Ku Klux Klan slogan. That's where it came from, and then it was adopted by the American Nazi Party. So I think we can take some of the blame for that. Apologies. Heidi, go ahead.
Oh, I appreciate that explainer, because we had Imran Ahmed from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, and he was drawn into this battle. I believe he worked with her, and at the root of it was that anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim propaganda that he was consuming. And again, these real life examples have to be noted, and we have to address it. And I feel like every other day we have an example of somebody who's been radicalized through Telegram and Facebook and all the various channels, who goes out and commits murder. And it's just another day passes, and the news cycle is full of this stuff. And again, we here at this show are trying to take these long form interviews and give people an opportunity to press pause and really evaluate what's going on and think about the kind of world that we want to live in. This is not acceptable for the future to continue to be dystopian like that. And that is why I'm very appreciative of your work. And if there's no objection from my team here, I would love for you to speak on your understanding of Cold War politics, war and genocide, and just sort of give people kind of a big picture view from history of what we're looking at right now, if that's possible, which I'm sure.
Well, I haven't prepared a lecture on that, but
That's okay. Whatever comes
No pressure,
to
no
mind.
pressure.
This show is usually a lot more chill, but the subject matter and the times in which we live are so serious that, I'm just trying to extract as much
No.
good information from you as possible. And
No.
our viewers are so smart. We literally have like rocket scientists,
I'm sure. Good. Well, I mean, I think the winding down of the Cold War in the 1980s, which led, of course, to the implosion of the Soviet Empire, the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet bloc in Europe, and then to the implosion of the Soviet Union itself. I mean, that is really the major background to where we are today. I mean, this is with Ukraine and with Russia's new war in Ukraine. I mean, it is that's. I mean, Putin himself talks about this as the big event of the 20th century. Clearly for a Russian nationalist, a Russian apparatchik like him, this is a great loss of power. That's Russia experienced with the collapse of the Soviet Empire and state, and that is basically where he's coming from. But it involves so many different dimensions, really. I mean, one dimension is clearly that in the 1990s, I think there were opportunities. It was a very fluid period. It was a period of, there had been this unanticipated collapse of the whole Soviet system. You have to go back. You remember in the 1980s when Reagan and Gorbachev were talking to each other. They were thinking in terms of the Soviet Union continuing, the Warsaw Pact continuing. Gorbachev thought that he could allow the Eastern European countries to become more independent, but they would still remain socialist. When East Germany underwent its revolution, people still thought maybe it would be some sort of socialist country. All that ended very, very quickly, and it had its own momentum. From Putin's point of view, a lot of it is the blame of the West. But I think one of the things we have to take on board here is the fact that it was the people of these countries who wanted change. They wanted democracy, and they wanted national independence. Basically, they wanted those. They didn't want to be ruled by the Soviet Union, and they didn't want an authoritarian or a totalitarian state ruling over them. And so they made a lot of the running. We hear a lot about the NATO expansion and Putin's objections to NATO expansion, and the fact that NATO allowed Ukraine and Georgia particularly to consider NATO membership. But actually, I mean, the demand was coming very much from these countries themselves, from the sections of society in these countries who wanted to break with the Soviet past and the Russian system, and wanted their own independence, and saw the West as they probably had some illusions about it, because we know it's not perfect, but they saw it as an improvement on the totalitarian system which they'd had, and they were right about that, obviously. So the expansion, the NATO expansion, which is one of the elements here, was largely fed by demand from the Eastern European and then the post-Soviet states themselves. And that's really, I think, we would have to go into the whole question of how the Putin regime emerged out of the chaos that existed in Russia in the 1990s after the Soviet Union. And I think the West did make mistakes in that period.
Absolutely.
We should have. I don't know. It would have been easy, but I think we were too. I'm saying. I think Western leaders, the first President Bush, for example, and and his British and European equivalents, were too complacent. They believed that that a sort of a continuing version of their order could sort of absorb the former Soviet countries, including Russia, without big changes. And they naively believed that you could change a top-down, centralized command economy into a market economy, at the flick of a switch almost, without people suffering. And of course, people did suffer, and that there was huge economic dislocation, huge poverty, especially in Russia itself.
Yeah.
And that's I think that was part of the breeding ground for the new authoritarianism that Putin represents. I don't know if that's maybe a start.
That was incredibly well put. And this is always the part where we only have a couple minutes left, and I wish we had an hour. Hi-Fi, let me get one thing out, and then it's your turn. You organized as a young man the biggest protests against the Vietnam War, which I think is very significant. And I'm of the mind that we should be beyond war, and we should always err on the side of no war. And from your experience from Vietnam to now, what precipice are we on as we look at this war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I'll just say that I wasn't the main organizer. I was probably too young to be a main organizer of those protests, but I did take part in it. But I think we are on a precipice. I think we're on a precipice partly because we haven't understood some of the things that have gone wrong in the last 20 years.
Yes.
We haven't understood what a terrible precedent the invasion of Iraq was in 2003.
Yes.
I mean, it was a different situation in some ways. It would have been wonderful if the Iraqi people had overthrown Saddam Hussein themselves, but for the United States and the UK to invade Iraq and to do what they did, which essentially was an illegal war, that is a big precedent, and I think it's influenced Putin. I think Putin, one of the things that Putin thinks, it's okay, if it's okay for the US to do that, then why shouldn't Russia do it? And I think we've stood on the sides. We've allowed, for example, Saudi Arabia, which is an ally of the United States and the UK, to engage in this war in Yemen, which has had terrible destructive effects. Just in many ways very similar to what's going on. We've allowed Syria to happen. So we've had these big experiences of war. I mean, what we're having it now, we're having it in Europe, and we're having it involving one of the major powers in the world, Russia, and a nuclear armed power. I mean, that all does make it even more serious. But somehow we have been too complacent, I think, about the practice of war and our own government's policies over the last few decades, 2 decades especially.
Well put. And Hi-Fi, do you want to have the last question here?
Last question. So one of the things we've noticed, obviously, is Russia has infiltrated high levels of government elites, both in the UK and the United States. There's money laundering going on. There's real estate, etc. London has a huge problem with this. But one of the things I've noticed, and you talk about in your book, you talk about racism. It seems to me like racism is being weaponized by a group of very wealthy, and when they say, oh, it's the elites, they're actually the elites. I mean, these are people who went to Oxford, Harvard, Yale, Cambridge. Do you feel like racism is being weaponized by the rich to keep the poor working white and poor working people of color classes from joining and creating a more equal society?
In a sense, yes. I mean, I don't think that they actually quite see it like that. I mean, I think that I'm talking particularly about the British elites. They see their God-given right to rule, really, and to make money, and to to do whatever deals they need to do with whatever dodgy businessmen or other elites around the world, but the racism is a way of keeping the population in its place. And it isn't just the poor. It isn't just really to do the poor. I mean, a lot of emphasis was placed in the early analysis of the Brexit and Trump phenomena on the poor white population. But it's also the comfortably off middle class. The sort of people who would probably have always voted Republican or in Britain Conservative, but have probably got less out of it over the decades. And this is it's not a new way, but it's a good way of reviving and renewing the control. And in the case of particular political leaders like Trump and Boris Johnson, I mean, it's a way of actually gaining power. It's a way of getting one up on the other elite figures that they're competing with.
Yes.
I don't know, your question, but that's where I would.
Yes. No, it does absolutely. It has multiple impacts. The last thing we'd like before you jump off and go back to your beautiful day is, do you have a good zinger line for our viewers on how we get past these aggressive policies that are just taking us back and not pushing us forward? What is the solution, if there is one?
I don't think there's a simple solution. I think I've been shocked, as everybody's been shocked, despite following everything. You sort of hope that it won't get to where we've got today. But I think it's solidarity, it's unity, it's pulling together really, and supporting the people who are on the front line of this, the Ukrainians. It's making sure that our voices are heard. I think we in terms of the domestic political battles that we've got in our countries, I think the right is compromised by this Russian intervention, as Hi-Fi was saying. I mean, this is really a big thing that we can use against them. I think we've got to sort of keep ourselves together and work for peace and justice.
Thank you. I'm all choked up.
I would really like if we could treat Trump, Farage, Johnson, Aaron Banks. Remember how they treated Mosley when Mosley went off for the Nazis?
Yeah.
We need to do that again.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't quite got to that stage yet, but yeah, let's push that in that direction. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Thank
Let's
you
get on
so
it.
much. I feel grateful, and I feel like whenever I've got a marching order, it takes me out of despair.
It does.
So thank you so much for spending this time with us. It was an honor, and word up to Byline Times, because it's how I found you. It's where I do my reporting now, and Stephen and Peter and Hardeep and Sharn are just really the wind beneath so many of our wings. So thank you.
I agree.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you. Oh, I cannot wait to send out the marching orders as early as the morning on what we need to do in order to battle for the salvation of democratic nations across the world. Thank you for that, Hi-Fi and Jim and Sean and Professor Shaw. All right, so do we have a digital dissent?
We are lucky. We have another Marjorie Taylor Greene clip.
Hooray! Hooray!
You know, the funny thing about it is I don't even make them for digital dissents. I just make them because it's stress relief. And then I show
Yes.
you guys, and then Heidi says, "Great, we have another digital dissent." So this is her talking about discussing whether or not polio requires multiple shots, which it does.
Oh, gee. Oh,
Um,
God.
we'll take a quick look
She
at this.
tried to science. She's trying to science.
She's trying to science.
You're
Yeah.
not supposed to trust
But we
the
don't believe the
science.
science.
Didn't you just say professional propagandist is now her, like, a chief of staff or something? Like, oh,
Yeah.
no.
Well, yeah.
Oh, gee whiz.
Fuck 'em
We're in
guy.
for it. We're in
Here we
for
go.
it.
Let's see. And her voice is not her voice. It's affected it a little bit.
Oh, jeez. Am I going to be
I don't
triggered?
know about you guys, but many of us were vaccinated as kids against polio. We had our MMR, and I have never seen the CDC coming out saying, "Oh, you've got to get your second polio shot. You got to get your third. You got to get your fourth." And this may continue to keep going.
And I have never seen the CDC coming out saying, "Oh, you've got to get your second polio shot. You got to get your third. You got to get your fourth."
Well done.
Nice sad trombone, dude.
Well
Nice
done.
sad trombone. Fuck yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
They've been telling us you need a second, third polio shot since for quite some time.
That was amazing.
That was it.
Oh, my God. What did Alex say? Frequency and repetition, like, is that what they're just going on,
Yeah, I guess so.
We don't live in a post-truth world. We don't live in a post-facts world.
We have records.
She's incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, she's not just incorrect. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been an op since the second she decided to fucking run. She had a troll army chase her opponent away. She's been nothing but fucking drama and bullshit. Yeah. What legislation has she put forward? Like, what? She's fucking useless.
She went on tour with Matt Gaetz after he was fucking investigated for child trafficking.
They had to run. They had to run. They were they were being chased everywhere. There was all these videos of them having to run.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody likes him except for some brainwashed folks.
Right,
oh my gosh.
The Russians.
What an episode. Wow. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, and again, what are we going to do? We're going to use that against him. This is the time when we use that against him. Thank you, Professor Shaw. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Professor Shaw.
See you guys Thursday live stream.
Can't wait.
All right, guys.
Can't
Bye.
wait.
Later.